The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien. Chapter 1. An Unexpected Party. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell, nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened on to a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel without smoke, with paneled walls and floors, tiled and carpeted, provided with polished beautiful chairs, and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on and on, going fairly, but not quite straight, into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people many miles around called it, and many little round doors opened off of it, first on one side, and then on the other. No going upstairs for the hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of pantries, wardrobes, he had whole rooms devoted to clothes, kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, going in. These were the only ones to have windows, deep-set, round windows, looking over his garden and the meadows beyond, sloping down into the river. This hobbit was a very well-to-do hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighborhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were quite rich, but also because they never, I say never, had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things quite altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbor's respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular hobbit. Wait, what is a hobbit? I suppose hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. There are, well, or were, a little people, about half of our own height, and still smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort, which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large, stupid folk like me and you come blundering along, making a noise like elephants, which they can hear a mile off. They are somewhat inclined to be fat about the stomach. They dress in bright colors, chiefly green and yellow, wear no shoes, their feet grow natural leathery soles, and thick warm brown hair like the stuff on our heads, and it's curly. They have long clever fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, the mother of Bilbo Baggins, that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said, in other families of course, that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That is, of course, absurd, but certainly there was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them. And once in a while, members of the Took clan would go and have some adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up. But the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father's name. Bungo built the most luxurious hobbit hole for Belladonna, and, must be said, partly with her own money. The most luxurious hobbit hole that was to be found either under the hill or over the hill or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit odd in his makeup from the Took side. Something that had only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo was grown up, being about 50 years old or so, and having lived in the most beautiful hobbit hole ever built by his father, which I have just described for you. Yes, that was until he had in fact apparently settled down forever, quite immovably. By some curious chance one morning long ago, in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and much more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormously long wooden pipe that reached down, nearly down to his woolly toes. Gandalf came by. Gandalf! If you had heard only a quarter of what I have heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place, wherever Gandalf went, in the most extraordinary fashion. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his old friend the Took had died, in fact, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been away over the hill and across the water on business of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, a silver scarf over which his white beard hung down below his waist, and his immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, and the grass was very green. But Gandalf looked at him from under long, bushy eyebrows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning? Or mean that it is a good morning, whether I want it to be or not? Or is it that you feel good on this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on? What do you mean, good fellow?" "All of them at once," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a feel of mine. There's no hurry. We have all the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without ever breaking, and it floated away over the hill.